December 8, 2021. The courtroom sat frozen as Scott Peterson stood before the bench. The man who once smiled into cameras, asking strangers to help find his missing pregnant wife, was now waiting to hear the sentence that would define every remaining year of his life. Nearly 2 decades had passed since Laci Peterson and her unborn son vanished on Christmas Eve, a disappearance that evolved into one of the most notorious criminal cases in American history. The story consumed the nation. It divided households, fueled outrage, and turned a quiet California husband into a symbol of betrayal. For years, Scott Peterson lived on death row inside San Quentin State Prison, waiting for the state to decide when his life would end. But on this day, the ending everyone expected was taken away. Instead of execution, the judge delivered a punishment many believe is far more cruel. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. No execution date. No final walk. No finish line. Just time, endless and unmoving. The court ordered Peterson to spend the rest of his existence behind concrete walls, not in the familiar isolation of death row, but in a system designed for perpetual survival. A place where days do not count down. They repeat. A place where hope erodes quietly, not all at once. Some believe death would have been justice. Others argue execution would have been too merciful. But here is what most people never consider. Death row offers certainty. Life without parole offers only duration. When the headlines faded and the cameras disappeared, Scott Peterson did not vanish from punishment. He vanished into a world built to erase identity. Steel doors, narrow cells, decades without relief. By the end of this video, you will understand why Scott Peterson's sentence may not be mercy at all, but something far worse. Tell me in the comments whether you agree or disagree alone. But first, you need to understand where he was sent. Long before headlines, court transcripts, and television debates, Scott Peterson lived a life that appeared uneventful in the best possible way. He was raised in San Diego, California, in a stable household that offered structure, opportunity, and predictability. He was an only child, surrounded by adults who believed he was destined for something respectable, something ordinary, something safe. His childhood did not include abuse, neglect, or instability. There were no police visits, no troubling school records, no documented behavioral issues. Teachers described him as polite. Friends described him as likable. He blended easily into environments where expectations were clear and responsibility felt optional. Scott grew up playing golf, attending school events, and moving through adolescence without drawing attention. He learned early how to mirror what people wanted to see. Confidence without arrogance. Charm without vulnerability. A calm presence that made others feel comfortable. On the surface, he was exactly the kind of person you would never suspect of anything violent. And that was the point. Nothing in his early life suggested danger. Nothing demanded closer inspection. When Scott attended California Polytechnic State University, known as Cal Poly, he appeared to follow the same predictable path. He studied agriculture business, a practical major with a future attached to it. It was there that he met Laci Peterson. She was expressive, warm, emotionally open in ways Scott was not. Where he was controlled, she was enthusiastic. Where he was reserved, she was generous with affection. Friends noticed the contrast immediately, but they interpreted it as balance rather than warning. Laci talked about the future openly. Marriage, children, a home filled with life. Scott listened, nodded, smiled, and absorbed the role he was expected to play. They married in 1997 and moved to Modesto, California, a quiet community where neighbors knew each other and routines rarely changed. To the outside world, their life progressed exactly as it should. Scott worked in sales, a job that rewarded his social skills and gave him freedom of movement. Laci worked as a substitute teacher and began settling into the idea of building a family. They bought a house. They adopted a dog. They hosted dinners. They became the kind of couple people pointed to when describing stability. In public, Scott appeared attentive and supportive. He smiled during gatherings. He held Laci's hand. He spoke about her kindly. But emotional presence is not the same as emotional investment. While Laci imagined a future expanding forward, Scott quietly imagined escape routes. In 2002, Laci became pregnant. The pregnancy was not sudden or accidental. It was planned. Laci embraced it fully. She documented milestones, decorated a nursery, and spoke excitedly about becoming a mother. She shared ultrasound photos with family members and discussed names with friends. Her identity was shifting toward something deeper, more permanent. Scott's was not. To him, the pregnancy did not represent growth. It represented entrapment. To neighbors and acquaintances, Scott appeared proud. He spoke about fatherhood casually. He attended social events. He maintained the appearance of commitment. But behind that surface, he had already begun detaching. While Laci prepared for life, Scott was quietly preparing for life without her. In November 2002, Scott met Amber Fry. She was a massage therapist and a single mother. They were introduced through a mutual connection, and from the beginning, Scott controlled the narrative. He told Amber he was single. He told her he had lost his wife. He spoke of grief without providing details. He crafted a story designed to invite sympathy while preventing scrutiny. Amber had no reason to doubt him. His calm demeanor made deception feel natural. Scott presented himself as available, emotionally wounded, and honest. He used travel for work as cover, disappearing for days without raising suspicion. He maintained two separate lives with precision. One grounded in routine and public appearance. The other built on secrecy and intention. Amber saw a man who seemed attentive and emotionally present. Laci saw a husband growing distant but not alarming. Then Scott said something that would later echo through courtrooms. He told Amber that this would be his first Christmas without his wife. At the time, Laci was alive. She was 8 months pregnant. She was decorating their home. This statement was not accidental. It was not confusion. It was future-oriented language spoken before the future arrived. Investigators would later identify this as a psychological fracture point. A moment where intention surfaced before action. As December approached, Scott continued living both lives. He attended social gatherings with Amber while Laci prepared for the holidays. He posed for photos. He smiled. He maintained appearances on both sides without visible strain. This was not the behavior of someone unraveling. It was the behavior of someone managing outcomes. On December 24, 2002, Laci Peterson disappeared. Scott told authorities he had gone fishing that morning. He said Laci planned to stay home, bake cookies, and walk the dog. He described the morning in ordinary terms. Surveillance footage later confirmed his presence at the Berkeley Marina, nearly 90 miles from home. The location was unusual. The timing was questionable. But at first, nothing appeared conclusive. Back in Modesto, a neighbor found the Petersons' dog wandering with its leash still attached. Hours passed before Scott reported Laci missing. When officers arrived, his demeanor was calm. He answered questions carefully. He provided details that felt rehearsed rather than recalled. He did not panic. He did not break down. He appeared focused on logistics rather than fear. As the investigation expanded, volunteers flooded the area. Candlelight vigils were held. Flyers covered storefronts. Media attention grew rapidly. Scott remained largely absent from search efforts. He made phone calls. He ran errands. He continued routine behaviors as if his life had not just fractured. Investigators began noticing the disconnect. Days later, Scott sold Laci's car. Then he began discussing selling the house. These actions did not align with hope. They aligned with preparation. When Amber Fry contacted police and revealed Scott's deception, the case shifted instantly. Public perception turned. The image of a grieving husband collapsed. And beneath it, something far more deliberate emerged. Once Amber Fray's statement entered the investigation, every detail of Scott Peterson's behavior was re-examined through a different lens. What once appeared neutral now looked calculated. His emotional distance became suspicious. His routine habits became signals. Investigators began reconstructing his movements with greater precision, tracing phone calls, credit card transactions, and travel patterns. The narrative was no longer about finding Laci alive. It was about understanding how she disappeared. Search efforts continued across Modesto and surrounding areas. Volunteers combed fields, rivers, and neighborhoods. Helicopters scanned terrain. Boats swept through waterways. Media coverage intensified, transforming private grief into national spectacle. Scott remained oddly peripheral. He appeared on television, asking for Laci's return, but his tone lacked urgency. His words felt measured. His expressions failed to align with the desperation viewers expected. Behind the scenes, detectives focused increasingly on the Berkeley Marina. Receipts placed Scott there on Christmas Eve. Witnesses confirmed he launched his boat alone. The water conditions were cold and rough. No evidence suggested fishing success. What investigators did find was a handmade concrete anchor. Scott claimed he made only one. Evidence suggested more. 3 months passed. Winter faded into spring. Public hope slowly deteriorated. Anger replaced optimism. On April 13, 2003, a couple walking along the Richmond shoreline discovered the remains of an infant. The next day, partial remains of an adult woman surfaced nearby. DNA testing confirmed the identities: Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The location of the remains was devastatingly precise. They surfaced in the same region Scott had traveled to on Christmas Eve. The bay did not scatter them randomly. It returned them methodically. Geography aligned with receipts, maps, and witness accounts. Investigators described the discovery not as coincidence, but confirmation. The recovery of the bodies dismantled Scott's narrative completely. His calm phone calls from the marina, his timeline, his anchor explanation, all of it collapsed under physical reality. The bay had answered questions Scott never intended to. An arrest warrant was issued. When police located Scott, he was hundreds of miles from home. His appearance had changed. His hair was bleached, his face obscured by stubble. His vehicle contained cash, survival equipment, multiple cell phones, and identification belonging to someone else. These were not the belongings of a man waiting to be cleared. They were the belongings of someone preparing to vanish. Scott claimed he was going golfing. Investigators did not believe him. His proximity to the Mexican border raised immediate concern. The idea that he might flee solidified public outrage. His arrest felt less like a tragic misunderstanding and more like the end of a pursuit. The trial that followed became a national fixation. Courtroom seats were filled daily. Media coverage dissected every expression, every gesture. Prosecutors framed the case around motive rather than emotion. They presented Scott as a man who wanted freedom without responsibility, a future unburdened by marriage or fatherhood. Amber Frey's testimony became the emotional core of the trial. Jurors heard Scott's recorded phone calls. His voice was calm, flirtatious, detached from the reality unfolding around him. While vigils were held for Laci, Scott spoke about vacations. While volunteers searched, he planned dinners. The contrast was damning. Evidence aligned gradually. The fishing trip, the anchor, the location of the bodies. Each detail reinforced intent. Jurors watched Scott as recordings played. He showed no visible reaction, no visible remorse. The absence of emotion became its own testimony. When the verdict was delivered, there was no surprise. Scott Peterson was found guilty. The sentencing phase was brief. The punishment was death, lethal injection. The courtroom searched his face for response. There was none. He accepted the sentence with quiet stillness. As if it had always been inevitable, Scott was transferred to San Quentin State Prison. Death row became his reality. His cell was narrow, concrete walls, steel doors, lights that never fully dimmed. Meals passed through slots, movement controlled, time measured not by seasons, but by counts. Death row is not designed for comfort. It is designed for waiting. Inmates exist in a suspended state, counting toward an ending. Scott began filing appeals, waiting for the state to set a date. Years passed inside a loop of routine and restriction. His world shrank to procedure. And then, unexpectedly, the endpoint disappeared. In 2020, nearly 18 years after Laci Peterson vanished, The California Supreme Court issued a ruling that altered Scott Peterson's future without altering his guilt. The court overturned his death sentence due to juror misconduct during selection. The conviction stood. The evidence remained. The verdict did not change. Only the punishment did. In December 2021, Scott returned to the courtroom. He no longer faced execution. The judge resentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence removed certainty. It removed finality. It replaced an ending with permanence. Scott was transferred from San Quentin to Mule Creek State Prison. The environment was different. Mule Creek was not designed for waiting. It was designed for endurance. Life without parole is not about anticipation. It is about repetition. At Mule Creek, routine governs existence. Inmates wake to lights and counts. Movement is monitored. Privacy does not exist. The day unfolds according to schedule, indifferent to individual identity. Fame offers no protection. If anything, it creates vulnerability. Scott's name was known. His crime was known. His presence carried weight. Inside prisons, social hierarchies are rigid. Certain crimes carry status. Others carry risk. Crimes involving pregnant women are not forgotten. Scott could not disappear into anonymity. His identity followed him through every corridor. There is no execution date to mark time. No calendar to count down. Days do not move toward resolution. They accumulate. Years stretch forward without shape. Time becomes something endured rather than lived. Life without parole is not defined by fear of death. It is defined by certainty of continuation. The door will not open. The routine will not change. The future will not arrive. Aging happens inside a structure that does not adapt. On death row, inmates know how their story ends. That knowledge, however terrifying, provides closure. In general population under life sentences, there is no such anchor. Existence becomes indefinite. The mind struggles against permanence. Scott wakes each day knowing nothing will improve. The world beyond the walls evolves without him. Technology advances. Families grow. Lives move forward. Inside, everything remains static. Each birthday passes without meaning. Each holiday arrives without celebration. Life without parole strips hope slowly. It does not shock. It erodes. The absence of possibility becomes its own punishment. There is no rehabilitation goal, no incentive, no transformation narrative. Only time. This is the sentence Scott Peterson now serves. Not a dramatic ending. Not a final moment. Prolonged erasure. A future measured not in events, but in endurance. Every day mirrors the last. Every tomorrow offers nothing new. Justice, in this form, does not arrive once. It arrives daily, quietly, repeatedly, without audience. And for Scott Peterson, that repetition is the sentence. What would disturb you more? Knowing the end is coming or knowing it never will? This story reveals how evil often wears an ordinary face. Speaks softly. It blends in. And when it strikes, the damage lasts far beyond headlines and trials. For Scott Peterson, justice did not arrive as a dramatic conclusion. It arrived as duration, as repetition, as years measured not by growth but by survival. His cell is not a space for redemption. It is a constant reminder. Every night, when the lights fade, silence replaces distraction. There are no cameras, no crowds, no attention, only a man left alone with the weight of irreversible choices. Life without parole means waking each morning with certainty. Certainty that nothing improves. Certainty that time offers no exit. It means aging in a system that does not remember who you were. It means observing the future without participating in it. Execution offers an ending. Life without parole offers continuation. Endless, unmoving, and without relief. Some believe death is the harshest punishment. Others believe death is release, an ending that closes the door. But living without parole keeps the door sealed forever, while time passes on the other side. Now the question shifts to you. Is justice found in death? Or is justice found in forcing someone to live forever with what they have done? Is an ending more severe than decades of isolation? Is permanence more punishing than finality? Tell us what you think in the comments. Is Scott Peterson's sentence a fate worse than death? Because for him, tomorrow brings no transformation. Tomorrow brings no progress. Tomorrow brings no freedom. Every morning, Scott wakes knowing tomorrow will mirror today, and freedom ended long before he ever reached the prison gates. Alone, forever unchanged.